We will now have invocation by Mr. Spears, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. The pledge leader for today is Cadet Lieutenant Debria Deloach from the Columbus High School ROTC.
Please bow your heads. Our Father, we come to you today thanking you so much for this beautiful day. We thank you so much for allowing our school district to continue to thrive and move forward. Lord, we just ask you continue to bless each person here, continue to protect everyone here. God, we just ask you continue to let this school district achieve and do your will as we move forward. In your name we pray. Amen.
May I ask that you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Right hand over heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Cadet Deloach. Now we would like to establish a quorum, and all of our members are present today, so we do have a quorum present. Next, we will move to open forum. We have two topics that are to be discussed for open forum. The first is from Mr. Tom Mullis and Mr. Jerome Stevenson with regard to the indoor practice facility.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. My name is Jim Mullis, and I represent the players, coaches, and parents of Columbus High School and middle school baseball and softball programs. We understand that tonight this board will vote on the capital project for the indoor practice facility for these programs. We have worked for 6 years trying to get this facility for our kids. We met with Dr. Phillips and engineers years ago with positive support, but in the end, the district was not able to do anything. I met with Dr. Phillips and asked if we could attempt to raise funds for this building, and we received approval to do so. We solicited donations from over 250 sources and only received about $5,000, in which the district has in an account. We had little business community support. We spent over 100 hours of our time working with Dr. Liddell and put together a 50-page grant proposal for the local industry foundation. It was a stretch based on the foundation's criteria, and we were turned down. Tonight, you have the opportunity to put Columbus Municipal School District baseball and softball team facilities closer to our competition. All of our 6A competitors have these facilities. We're not asking for the high-scale versions that most of them have. We want the basics. We're also the only school in Lowndes County that does not have these facilities. And why do we need it? Team practice begins in February. It's cold and wet in February. Many times we cannot practice due to weather. Kids go home instead of getting the instruction needed. The facility will allow practice any time of the year under the most adverse conditions, same as our competition. Last period athletic class. Coaches can use facilities for class instruction, same as our competition. Provide static stations for skills enhancement and protect schools' assets. Last year, our 20-year-old pitching machine was stolen after the boosters had it repaired. Last year in the playoffs, we missed 2 days of drill and practice before games due to rain. We had nowhere to go. Our competition used their facilities. Lastly, it provides the framework to improve performance and skills of our children. The better athletes they become, the more opportunities they have for scholarships. Many kids do not have the resources to pay for college. This facility will pay for itself over time in scholarships. Lastly, your CHS Falcon baseball team just recently made it to the quarterfinals of the 6A championship. They did it through player determination, coaching, and parental support. We did it without a lot of support from the district over the past years. This year has been better, but the sky would have been the limit had we had the same tools as our competition. On a senior players to scholarship ratio, baseball has been your top athletic scholarship program. This year alone, 56% to 67%, we got one they're working on getting a scholarship for, of the 9 seniors will sign baseball scholarships. Some would have with no other resources to attend higher education. You can thank Coach Cook and his staff for this. Just think of what he could have accomplished with the resources in place. This board has the opportunity to correct this deficiency in our programs. We understand that the money is there, and we ask respectfully for your support in voting unanimously yes to fund it. And Jalen and Deontay, go back there. Stand up, guys. That's part of your 6A championship baseball team, and these guys are the future. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Mullis, for coming and sharing with us tonight. Next signed up for open forum is Bobby McCullough.
Basically, it was on the same subject. I believe you read my notes, so I'm just going to pass it on to them. But basically, I'm supporting the same speech that he did. And just to add to it, everything that he has said in a nutshell is exactly right. Me and him have worked closely together on trying to establish this indoor facility. We've coached in the park. We came up with these kids. These seniors are very special to us. But nevertheless, they didn't have the chance to enjoy the indoor facility. But we do know that if it's established, then maybe it will help some of the kids that's coming along. And we have a chance to have a good competitive baseball team there here in Columbus to establish everything that sports brings to the school as far as competition and to drive a kid to do better on his academics. So I'll just add that in there along with his speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough, for sharing. Next, we move to adopt the agenda. Board, we have the agenda before us. This requires an action. Is there a motion?
Make the motion that we adopt tonight's agenda.
Okay, it has been motioned. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It has been properly motioned and second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Discussion, Mrs. Fisher?
Madam President and Board, we've just heard how sincere the parents are and the leadership in the sports program, especially baseball, are in making sure that our children have an indoor practice facility. But I did hear that's one of the reasons, among others, that it was never brought to fruition is because of funding. And I have a great concern with the information that we have been given regarding funding tonight. And because of that concern, I'm asking that item 10 item 10, and that's A, I believe it is. I'm sorry, it's so small I can't see it. Item 10A be tabled until our June meeting, until we have an opportunity to have some figures that match in terms of reporting.
Is it the salary scales?
The
Mrs.
salary
Fisher?
schedules.
Salary schedules, which is item A.
I'm sorry, this is so small I can barely see it. It is item 10A. Some of these salaries are not, well, all of these salaries are not ones that were recommended by the state.
I'd like to just note that I have had an opportunity to speak with all of the board members regarding the salary schedules and to have questions asked about the salary schedules for 14-15. In our budget workshop that we had with the board, we showed you our salary projections. We showed you the MAEP allotment that we've received from MDE in the amount of $19 million. We showed you that we are able to cover the salaries with the MAEP funding, and we are asking that you approve the salary schedules for the 2014-15 school year so that we can move forward with issuing contracts.
So for item number A, consideration to approve the 2014-2015 salary schedule, is there a motion?
So moved.
That's,
Is there a second? It's been motioned by Mr. Spears. Is that second?
I will second that.
It has been properly motioned and second. Any discussion?
And this is 10A, correct?
This-
Okay.
This is 10A. Any discussion?
I have some
Mr. Lewis?
discussion. Yes, on the salary schedule, and I did talk to Ms. McGill earlier, there are some of those schedules that are inclusive of a raise. And I know that there's a motion on the table already, but I really wish that we would strongly consider taking those raises out and approving the rest of the schedule.
Is there,
Madam President, the only way that could happen at this point with a motion and a second on the floor is for this motion and second to be withdrawn.
Mr. Spears? Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any more discussion? All in favor of approving the salary schedules as they are presented, please signify by raising your right hand. All opposed, please signify by raising your right hand. The motion fails.
May I ask the board to provide me an explanation for why the salary scales will not be approved?
Board, does anyone have anything that they would like to share with Mrs. McGill on why the salaries won't be approved for tonight? We can open up for discussion right now. I think Mr. Lewis asked that those items that represented an increase in salary, that those items be removed from the list and that everything else be considered. I know in our discussions you explained to me how some of the salaries were calculated by MDE, but some of them were calculated here at the central office. So I know that that was a concern for me.
May I address that, Madam President? We receive from MDE the salary scale for the teachers only. So those are the only salary scales that are provided to us from the state level. And those salary scales that you have, or the salary scale for the teachers, does reflect the amount that we were provided for MDE.
Board, is there any other discussion or any
I
other feedback?
would
Mr. Spears?
just for clarification purposes, I would like to know which of the scales are being contested. The title.
Mrs. McGill, will you share that? I think you shared that with me on yesterday.
That would be scale number 2, which is the assistant superintendent scale. We were asking that that scale be changed to reflect the duties that that job entails, and the fact that that is an assistant superintendent job that is lower than the high school principal scale. We were asking to bring it into alignment so that that district level assistant superintendent scale is at least the same as the high school principal. We were asking for scale number 28, special assistant to personnel, be increased. That is the in the personnel office. In the past, we have had 2 people in that office, and for the last 2 or 3 years, that scale, office has only 1 person. We compared and we got, we asked for comparisons to surrounding districts. And in surrounding districts our size, there are 2 to 6 people in the personnel office with salaries much higher than the scale that we are paying to the special assistant to personnel. And so we were asking to bring that scale into alignment with surrounding districts. Scale number 33, for assistant director, for the head food service manager. We brought the food service back into the district from Aramark, and we have increased duties for the people who are in our district, and we're asking to bring that scale into alignment. We are asking to change scale number 34 for the chief security officer from 221 days to 236, because we do have events that go on all year, including during the summer. So that's not an increase in salary, but it is an increase in days, which amounts to more money. And as I have said, we have projected salaries, and we know that the amount of money that we received from MDE in our MAEP allotment does cover the increases.
Madam President, if it'd be the will of the board, I'd like to do a verbal vote once again on this item.
We're going to move with the agenda, Mr. Spears, and we do understand that anyone who voted in opposition to this item may have an opportunity to bring it back up under such other matters if they choose. Mr. Spears.
Madam
Mr.
President,
Lewis.
if I'm in order, I'd like to make a motion to remove those 6 items that, salaries, schedules that she just named, and approve the rest of the.
And I will repeat the same thing to you that I shared with Mr. Spears. It may come up under such other matters at the end of the meeting. Mr. Dunn?
You know, in other words, I guess if final action was taken on personnel, then we need to move on.
Right.
She's right.
So we're now at item number B, consideration to approve staff personnel items. Mrs. McGill, is there anything that you'd like to share on that item? Board, we have had that list and we've had an opportunity to review it. This will require an action. Is there a motion to approve the personnel items?
So move.
It has been motioned by Mr. Spears and second by Mr. Leisenheiser. Is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, all in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. It is unanimous. Next, we move to item number C, 2014-2015 CMSD employee work calendars. Board, that is for information only. Next, we move to Board of Trustees. Item number A is policy discussion. For that item, I do have 2 policy proposals or reviews that I would like to present to the board for consideration. The first being, this time of the year, it seems that we always have an issue with ranking in our graduating class. And so I did a little research and found out that we have 2 identical policies for ranking class. We have policy IHC and policy JFH. I contacted the interim. I have copies. Is that enough copies? Perfect. So the 2 policies in question would be policy number IHC and policy number JFH. The 2 policies are identical. However, the thing that's missing from those policies is what do we do about students who transfer into the district and their ability to compete for valedictorian or salutatorian status. So I contacted the superintendent on last week to ask that very question, and she provided me with the language that we have in our handbook, our district handbook. However, that language does not appear in any of our policies anywhere. And I have given you the language that is written in our student handbook on page 77, and it says a student must have attended CHS for 4 consecutive semesters, and then number 2, a student must be classified as a senior on August 1 on the school year he or she plans to graduate. We need to be really consistent about how we use that language, board, and we need to make sure that it is someplace other than just in our student handbook. So I am asking that the board would would ask the superintendent to go back with the policy team and just see what can we review and what kind of language can we come up with so that we are consistent with the way that we word it, the way that we phrase it, and the way that we carry out that policy. Is there any discussion? So I would ask that the board allow the interim superintendent and her staff to look at those two policies and determine which of those we no longer need and how that language should be crafted such that we are consistent. And the language can be found on page 77 in the handbook. Does that require an action, Mr. Dunn?
You can simply direct the superintendent to do it. I don't think it takes action of the board unless you want to.
Mrs. McGill.
We can do that. We are, as you know, we are in the process of reviewing all policies, and this will fit in with the policy, the section that we're currently reviewing, and Mrs. Lenore will assist with that.
I will note too, in the handbook, those two items are out of place. Okay.
We
You got
already
it.
have that.
You got it. Thank you. The other policy that I wanted the board to consider, it is an MSBA sample. There is an MSBA sample policy, JCDAB, which is Student Drug Testing Program for Extracurricular Activities. The purpose of this is to protect the health and safety of our students involved in extracurricular activities. None of us really want to think about our students potentially using illegal drugs, and we want to make sure that we keep it that way, that our students aren't. But as a way to preempt illegal drug use, I think a policy like this may deter students who may be tempted from peer pressure or whatever the case may be. And so I would like for us to consider this policy. A couple of districts in the state who have this policy is the Clinton Public Schools and the Neshoba County School District. So I would also ask that the superintendent take this up as a consideration to bring language back to the board for that policy.
I would like to inform you, we haven't gotten to it yet, but we have already had Chief Bonner to gather information related to this sample policy, as well as locate a source for drug testing. And we have received quotes from several companies related to this policy. So we have planned to propose this policy to the board.
Excellent. And will you have feedback for us in time for our next meeting?
We already have all the information together, so I think we can,
Okay,
yes.
excellent, thank you. Next, under Board of, yes, Ms. Fisher.
Will that information be available, and can action be taken or presented to the board prior to the publishing of the handbook, or will it have to, if it's approved, go in as an attachment or a supplement?
I don't know. We're close to being ready to submit our handbook to the board for approval at the June meeting. Is that correct, Ms. Lenore? And so it's possible, Ms. Fisher, that we can get it done in time.
But if not, it can go in as an
addendum, but
as
it's
an
possible we can get it in the handbook.
All right, thank you. The next item under Board of Trustees is the Community Advisory Committee. At last month's meeting, I asked Mr. Latzenheiser and Mr. Lewis to do some due diligence around the Community Advisory Committee, and just want to know if there is a report at this time.
There is.
Mr. Latzenheiser.
Okay, first of all, a great deal of information has been generated, not only on what we have done as a district in the past, but also with other school districts across the country. We have information about the organizational and structure of committees under Dr. Lester Beeson, Dr. Thera Myers, Dr. Dale Phillips, and Dr. Martha Liddell. In addition to that, we have developed information, have bylaws, and we have procedures, and we have information from the school districts of Austin, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Newark, New Jersey, and Broward County, Florida. And next week, Mr. Lewis and I are going to meet, and we're going to call these districts and find out what works for them and how they organize this, and just basically get some feedback from districts across the country about the operation of their various committees. So we're very excited about it, and next month we will report to you the results, not only of what we have done in the past, but also what these other school districts are doing across the country.
All right, thank you, Mr. Leisnizer. Mr. Lewis, do you have anything to add? Perfect. Well, thank you both for agreeing to serve on that committee. The next item under Board of Trustees is the superintendent search. We do know that we were able to come up with the different stakeholder sessions that are starting tonight, and that's kind of where we are with the process. So everybody, I think there's one piece of information that Mr. Spears asked me about that I emailed it last week, but I know we've been having some issues internally with our district email. So Mrs. Ballard is going to check to see if she has it, so that we can make sure that everybody gets the information. And the information is, at the meeting we had with the consultants, the question was asked, how many expedited searches have you done and what is the success? And so they provided that information. So we do have it, and Mr. Spears will make sure that the entire board gets that information. Next, we're moving to the Office of Business Management, Tammy McGarr.
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
I've provided all of the listed reports to you, and are there any questions on any of them?
Ms. McGill, Ms. McGill, excuse me, McGarr.
That's
Sorry
okay.
about that. It's too early in the morning for me. One thing I was curious about is in reviewing the Fund 1120, from calculations, it looks as if the unexpended balance is about $6.6 million. And from discussions on the financials and different things, there's about another $1.5 million that at the will of the board, could be decommitted and go back into fund balance. And while I know it's a moving target, that would put the cash fund balance at about $8.1 million.
Well, the 1.5 is not actually in 1120.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But it would. But from my understanding is that once it's decommitted from where it was put to before and can't be utilized in that form, it will go back to Fund 1120.
That is correct.
And be at the board's discretion as to how it's utilized.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
The question on the money that Mr. Spears just talked about, I thought that we were going to put it back in the fund and then we were going to turn around and use it again.
That would be at the board's discretion as
Okay.
to what your wishes are for that money.
But just to be clear, once it comes back to 1120, it's at the board's discretion. It's not something that automatically has to go back out the door.
That's correct.
And Mrs. McGarr, that 1.5 million, the intent of it was to be used to do?
It was transferred from district maintenance back in 2011 into the Qualified School Construction Bond Fund, and it was used to make future payments on that debt. But according to Jim Young, our debt counsel, because of IRS regulations, we can't front-end load those payments. And so it's just sitting there right now. So my recommendation is that we uncommit that, move it back to district maintenance, and then it could be used for whatever. It could be used to pay down other debts or whatever the board feels would be in the best interest of the school district.
Question.
Mrs. Fisher?
I'm sorry, that transfer was made in 2011?
That's correct.
And, I'm sorry, the gentleman's name again?
Jim Young. He is with
Mr. Young.
Young Law Group.
When did he render that advisement?
I talked to him on the phone about a month ago, and we were just
So
trying
we've just
to.
been holding on since 2011 to the 1.5
That's
million?
correct. That's correct.
It's actually more, ain't it?
It's actually 1.8 million in the fund, because every year we have transferred over $250,000 out of the district maintenance fund.
But it was 1.5 that was transferred
That was
in
at
2011.
that one time, in that one transfer, it was 1.5 million.
And why has it just been sitting there since 2011?
I think, well, I can't answer that because I was not here at that time. I know that that was what it was intended for, to pay on the Qualified School Construction Bond.
right, thank you, Ms. McGraw. Was there anything else that you were going to share tonight?
Yes, I have some information that I've provided each of you a copy of. And Ms. McGill and I have either talked to you in person or talked to you, each of you, on the phone. But what I went over with you in each of those discussions, I've put in spreadsheet form for your information purposes. And those are the 3 pages that I gave you that are stapled together. And I also included a copy of our 2013-2014 ad valorem tax request worksheet that was prepared last year and presented to the levying authority last year.
Ms. McGar, excuse me, do we have those attachments on the board agenda?
No, they were just given for information purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Are they on board? Board, are there any questions for Mrs. McGarn with regards to the ad valorem report that she's providing? Mrs. Spears?
I would just like, if you were going to go through this, that you go through it to explain it a little bit more in detail.
I can. The first page, I took the ad valorem request, as noted on the ad valorem tax request worksheet, and summarized it and showed the dollar amount that we requested, and the value of a meal at that time was approximately $204,000. So I took the dollar amount that we requested and divided it by 204,000, and that would be the number of meals that were requested. First of all, for operations, and then for each debt service that we levied. As you will see, on the total that we requested was $13.2 million, and that was a total of 64.87 meals. The city levies an additional 1 meal to cover homestead loss and collection fees. So if you would recall, on our official budget presentation that was presented last year, there was a total of 65.87 meals. That is where that extra meal is coming into play at. And we do not budget that extra meal in our budget. That is set by the city. That is not in our request, so we do not budget that. And therefore, it should not be taken into a shortfall or escrow calculation. The second page, also on page 1 at the bottom, I also included the code section that states that in making the levy, the levying authority, which is the city, shall levy an additional amount sufficient to cover anticipated delinquencies and cost of collection. The second page, since a lot of sometimes there's a lot of confusion on ad valorem sometimes because it's a very complicated topic. So I included an analysis that showed how what we requested last year was sufficient to pay our debt. And so you can see from this work paper that we had sufficient funds to pay all of our principal and interest on the debt that we had levied.
And Madam President, if you don't mind, one question goes that I noticed, there was amount requested $17,000.
That's correct.
But that was a combination of what we levied, money that was already in the account, and of course some other pledged amounts that come in with MAEP.
That's correct.
Which would give us more than enough on our request to pay these debts.
Yes, that is correct.
Without having to continue to ask for more and more money.
Right. And we have made all of our debt payments for this current year, except for the QZAP bonds, and we do have the funds ready. The payment is not due yet, so they will be paid by the end of the fiscal year. Are there any questions on page 2? And then page 3. We did receive last Monday, this was after our budget work session that we had on April 30th, we did receive some estimated collections from Mr. Greg Andrews, the tax collector, and he gave us some estimated collections that we could probably expect to receive for the months of May, June, and July. And so I took those amounts that he has estimated and I broke them down. In looking at a shortfall or escrow calculation, you can't just take the lump sum that we get. We have to divide it up and do a separate analysis just on maintenance and then a separate analysis for each debt service issue. And so I compared what we had received so far and then his estimations that we should receive for the rest of the fiscal year. And I have broken those down for you. And as far as an escrow or shortfall in maintenance, we actually are looking at possibly receiving more than we requested. So that is a good thing. And then on the 3 mil notes, we are also looking at collecting more than we estimated. The only possible shortfall that we might have would be in the shortfall notes and the GO bonds. And as you will recall, on April 30th, when I went over the possible levies that we would be looking at levying for our debt service, what I did, I presented to you a worst-case scenario and took exactly what we had received at the end of March and pretty much said, okay, that's it, we're not receiving anything else, so this is where we would be if we did not receive anything else. So actually, any funds that we receive after March 31st through the end of the fiscal year will be used to decrease those levies that I presented to you on April 30th.
Board, are there any questions
Yes.
for Mrs. McGarty, Mr. Spears?
So in just a very simplistic answer, when it comes to matching up with the revenues coming in, the expenditures that have to be made, and where we could kind of forecast where we'll be at, you're saying we'll have just a slight shortfall based off of the debt amount?
That is correct.
And based off of the debt amount for the $1.8 million or number that we said, it wouldn't have to be something we had to go back to the taxpayers. We could take that right off the front end to go to making sure that because we may have come up short on collections without having to declare a shortfall.
That's correct. I do not foresee having to issue any debt to cover any shortfalls, based on the fact that I did use very conservative estimates in my levy projections, and the fact that I pretty much said we're not getting anything else. So anything we do get will actually improve those figures that I did give you at first.
And so just in other discussions that are related to this, you stated 7% of our fund balance would be about $1.7 million.
I can look that up real quick. Yes, it would be 7% of our projected revenues at the end of the year would be $1,773,000.
So essentially, it's right at a wash between what this board could take action to do. And then we still have roughly $6.5 million there over that required amount.
Yes, the $6.5 million, that is funds that we have carried over from previous years.
Correct.
So we currently have that in our fund balance that we've carried over from prior years.
And so as we kind of measure out how to allocate, we can still have a very healthy fund balance going forward with the potential of starting to decrease the amount that we request, which could possibly mean tax cuts for the city.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McGarry.
Sure.
Any other questions for Mrs. McGarry? I think the next item on the agenda is consideration to approve one-time expenditures.
I make the motion that we approve the one-time expenditures.
It has been motioned by Mr. Spears. Is there a second?
I will second that.
It has been seconded by Mr. Lotzenheiser. Is there any discussion?
Madam
Mr. Lewis.
President, may I just remind the board, may I make a comment? I'd like to remind the board that initially, when we presented the one-time expenditures, the board asked for backup documentation showing where we arrived, how we arrived at the figures. We provided that. The board had questions about the fund balance, the debt, the MAEP, and the salary projections, and we provided a workshop on April the 30th to provide you all of that information along with the reports. The board had questions about the ad valorem collections, and we have gathered the information related to the ad valorem request, and we have provided all of that to all of you, hopefully with the idea that you would have confidence that the money that we have asked for is there and is available for these very appropriate expenditures to improve student achievement in our district.
Thank you, Mrs. McGill. Mr. Lewis?
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Madam President,
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
again, if I am in order, I'd like to make a substitute motion
Mr. Lewis?
that we purchase textbooks for $505,979.02 and a special education bus at $87,500.
Is there a second?
We have a motion on the floor, do we not?
So, Mr. Lewis made a substitute motion.
I think that there has to be agreement on a substitute motion, does it not? For the ones that made the motion and the second have to be willing for there to be a substitute to that motion.
Well, I mean, we're still in the discussion part of this. I mean, I know he made the substitute motion, but we have to take back our motion and our second before any substitute motion would be able to be handled.
I believe that you're going to have a withdrawal of the motion and the second that's on the floor in order to have a substitute motion.
So we're still in
And
discussion.
you're still in discussion
So we-
at this point. I don't think you've closed it, Madam President.
Discussion, Ms. Fisher.
Question. Mrs. McGill, thank you for meeting with me on Friday, you and Mrs. McGar, but at that time, you indicated that you were going to be more than willing to take each one of the requests in the one-time expenditure item by item. And I wasn't aware that that had changed, but it has.
Mrs. McGill?
Mrs. Fisher, Madam President, Mrs. Fisher, we have proposed to you the one-time expenditures with the idea that all of the expenditures are important, and we would like to ask for all of the one-time expenditures to be approved. If that can't happen, then we would like for the items to be taken one at a time. And I don't know where we are in that process, but I would like for that to happen if we cannot agree to approve all of the expenditures. And let me just add that every item on here has been carefully discussed during the budget process, and the need has carefully been analyzed. The budget has carefully been analyzed to be sure that when we brought these recommendations to you, that the budget would support them and that the needs were documented. And so we do have the documented need. We do have the backup documentation. We've provided you all of the budget documentation, and while we can take them one by one, we are still asking for all of the items to be approved.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. McGill. I would like to clarify, though, the board has not had any discussions regarding the 2014-2015 budget. We have talked about the debt that we have and our projections as far as that is concerned, but we have not had the first meeting with regards to what the budget, the actual budget will look like for 2014-2015. So I just wanted to make that clear, but we are looking forward to a meeting with you and your staff with regards to that.
The debt workshop that we had included information regarding, I believe, like maybe 10 years out. Is that right, Ms. McGar? So it did include,
Through 2025.
yes.
Madam President, if I
Mrs.
may,
Spears?
in looking at the financial health of this district and the potential it has to continue to strengthen itself, I'd use very basic arithmetic. I'll outline it again. The state mandates that we have just under $1.8 million, so we'll round up to $1.8 million. Take that off of $8.1 million, then that drops us down to, any takers?
No, but we appreciate your analysis,
no,
Mr.
but
Spears.
I'm discussing this.
Yeah, well,
6.3.
But we're going to make sure
Right,
that we
right.
adhere to the time that we've allotted, not only for each of the items,
Right,
but
but I
for this
haven't
meeting
had-
as a
I
whole.
haven't-
So
I
I will
haven't-
give you 1 minute to make your final statement, and then we will have to move on.
Okay, so after we strip out everything that we need to strip out, cover a manageable shortfall if it exists once we get to the end of this year, we will have sitting in cash collected from the taxpayers of this district, from the parents of this district, a little over $4 million if we've paid the $1.951,477.27 million tonight for these one-time expenditures.
All right, thank you, Mr. Spears. So is there any more discussion? I think there is a motion on the table. It has been motioned by Mr. Spears and second by Mr. Lotzenheiser that we approve the one-time expenditure. All in favor of approving the one-time expenditure, please vote by raising your right hand. All opposed, please vote by raising your right hand. The motion fails. Next, we're moving to consideration
Madam
to
President,
approve.
May I make a comment? I was asked last week, a month, to provide some guidance based on the public school accountability standards.
Yes.
And I want to have, at least make an attempt to say something about a couple of matters. And, you know, I think it's important that, and you can find this online if you want to, we're under the process standards. It's page 20 of the Mississippi Public Schools Accountability Standards of 2012.
Mr. Dunn.
Are
Yes.
we following the agenda?
Right, Mr. Dunn.
I think you are. I mean, you can tell me not to talk, but I'm talking about what you just did, and Ms. Fisher asked me last month to be prepared to report, you know, if I feel like there's a, possible violation of accountability standards, and I am now trying to do that, but if you don't want me to do it, I'll be quiet.
But I would ask that you bring it up under such other matters that come before the board, and that way we can continue to move along with the
That's
agenda
fine.
as it's printed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the consideration to approve bond budget increase from fund balance, but I don't think that that is required because the fund balance was going to be increased based on the one-time expenditures.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion that we amend the agenda and that we move such other matters that may come before the board up to where we are currently at in our agenda, which it should move it up to item, let's see, what's that, 12?
Item 12I. Is that where you?
Well, it would move it up to item 12G.
G.
Or I'm sorry, 12H.
All right, thank you, Mr. Spears. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It has been motioned by Mr. Spears and seconded by Mr. Lotzenheiser. Is there any discussion? All in favor
I
of
have discussion.
Mr. Spears?
Just as we've, moved so many things to this part of the agenda, I think that it would only be fitting that the public that's here have the opportunity to hear that discussion. And while I know that there are certain things that may kind of prolong our meeting, I just ask that we would show them the consideration to allow them to hear the discussions about these certain topics.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. Is there any other discussion? So it's been motioned by Mr. Spears, second by Mr. Lotzenheiser. All in favor of amending the agenda so that we can bring such other matters that may come before the board up to the point where we are now, please signify by raising your right hand. All opposed, please signify by raising your right hand. The motion fails. The next item on the agenda is the summary of reconciled bank statements. Mrs. McGar, is there anything that you need to share there?
No, there's not.
Next item is the monthly approved to pay the bills. We have the claims docket by vendor, the claims docket by recap. Board, this will require an action such that we can pay the bills that we have.
So move.
It's been motioned by Mr. Lewis. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Mr. Lotzenheiser. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. It is unanimous. The next item on the agenda is the monthly safety report, which is for information only. The monthly transportation revenue and expenses is for information only. The monthly child nutrition and revenue expenses is for information only. That brings us now to the Office of the Deputy Superintendent for consideration to approve the R.E. Hunt Cultural Museum lease agreement. Okay, Mr. Shannon does not have anything that he'd like to add. Board, we have had this lease agreement to consider. Is there any discussion?
You need a motion.
We do.
I'll make a motion that we approve.
Thank you, Mr. Leisenheiser. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Fisher. Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Spears.
One question that I had posed when this lease first came up for discussion is the current usage of the facility. How often it's used, what expenses is the district carrying to provide the museum? And I would just like to know, Ms. McGill, do you have that information?
We do have that information. Mr. Shannon, would you please provide us that information?
Madam President, if I can have just a moment to explain
Mr.
how these
Shannon.
numbers were calculated. What I did was take the total area of the space that is being used at Hunt and transferred those into percentages. And I took the cost of the utilities, the electricity, the water, and the gas for the last 5 years and did calculate an average for that. We do have 58,000 square feet that is currently being used at Hunt. We do have a part of the second floor that is not heated or cooled at Hunt, that we don't incur any costs for that. You have the average electricity cost, water cost, and annual gas cost. I did talk to one of the board members of this project, Mr. Johnny Johnson, and tried to get a estimate of how often that area is used. The museum, it's used about once a month on average there. And you see that the museum portion is 9,500 square feet, or about 16%. So what I actually did was take the museum, which is 16%, multiplied it by 63,000, which is our annual utility cost, and multiply that by 1/12, which is their usage. And you see their usage comes up to about $850 a year, or $70.90 per month. When that was being calculated, we did go ahead and do the other portions of the building, so you would have that information if so needed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shannon. Are there any questions for Mr. Shannon?
The only
Mr.
other question
Spears?
I have is, is there any rent being collected from this property? Okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Shannon? Mrs. Fisher?
Mr. Shannon, on the first floor, the 35%, is that for the alternative school?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Since you have this report, the square footage, I know there was a time where we asked for a similar report for this location and a comparison between this location and Hunt, and really the other facilities that the district still owns where we're not housing students. Mrs. McGill, will we get that report so that we can make the comparison between the two? Because I know we've been talking about selling. I mean, we've had all of these properties listed now for a long time.
We have much of that information available already, and we'll try to have that done by the next board meeting.
Well, thank you for the information.
Question.
Ms. Lewis?
Mr. Shannon, the total average utility cost is $63,000 for that building? Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Will you repeat that, Ms. Lewis?
I was just trying to be sure that the total average annual utility cost was $63,000.
Yes, sir.
There is a motion and a second on the floor.
All right, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any more discussion? All in favor of approving this agreement for R.E. Hunt Museum, please signify by raising your right hand. All opposed, please signify by raising your right hand. The motion carries.
May I ask which GL made the motion? I wrote it down and forgot. Was it Mr. Lawson? Okay, thank you.
That brings us to item number, for information, items only, dates to remember. We have May 23rd, 2014 as the student's last day of school. May 24th, 2014, graduation at MSU at 10 a.m. May the 26th, 2014, Memorial Day holiday. And May 29th, 2014, teacher's last day.
Madam President,
Yes, Ms.
I
Latson.
believe there's a very important date that is not listed here, and that's May the 22nd, which would be class night at Columbus High School. Correct me, Ms. McGill, is the 22nd the date of class night?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that, Ms. Lotzenheiser. Board, that takes us to a closed determination for executive session.
So moved.
All right, it has been moved by Mr. Lotzenheiser, and no second is required. Public, we will ask that you would step out. Oh, I'm sorry, we do need a vote. All in favor of going into executive, the closed determination, please signify by raising your right hand. All right, all opposed? It is unanimous.